let me apologize. Hello. Greetings, salutations, good everything, Nubians. Hi.
Good everything.
I am so greedy with my time with Dr. Carr. And
No,
so I apologize
we have
for
all the time in the world, as Louis
that's
Armstrong's song recorded. We have all the time in the world.
so we were having a chit chat because Monday is MLK Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, actual physical birthday, and the holiday is on Monday. And
Yes,
so
which
so
means
we're
we are duty bound to be in office hours on Monday night. That's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yes. So we're going to give a little taste, but I feel like what we were talking about should be heard by people. So you and I, because we have these candid conversations on mic, off mic, it doesn't matter. We always are going to talk candidly
Always.
about this generation of well, actually, we were having a subtext conversation about media and how everybody now has a microphone. Pat McAfee. I think he has a program, and Aaron Rodgers come on there and say anything, and he got ethered by Jimmy Kimmel because Jimmy Kimmel actually has a brain and is uh, has writers, and he ethered him. And then you were talking about these athletes who have podcasts like Gilbert Arenas, and he and Kenya Martin were having a conversation about the GOAT.
Rashad McCants was the third person. Rashad McCants is the one that started. Apparently, Rashad McCants was blazing Stephen A. Smith, because Stephen A. Smith blazed him because Rashad McCants said that that Stephen A. Smith disrespected Kobe Bryant by saying that he wasn't the GOAT or something. They were arguing. I mean, the beef, I guess, sells tickets. By the way, I'm sure you saw Cat Williams with Willie D for 2 hours,
I
continuing.
did not. I did not.
You
I'm,
know,
I'm done.
after Willie D and Scarface broke up, I suppose. And this is all podcast, guys, which means
I'm
it's
catted out.
catted.
I'm cat.
No, cat is people are eating off cat like crazy. But anyway, back to the concept. And so Stephen A. Smith went on his much larger subsidized platform, ESPN, and just drug Rashad McCants for filth. And then, of course, in his classic Stephen A. Smile, Nzinga Heru, whenever she wanted to roast somebody, she would give the metaphor of, I'm going to cut you, but I'm going to blow on you as I'm cutting you so you don't know your cuts. And so I think about that every time I hear Stephen F. say, and I love Rashad McCants. I remember you when you was in college, and I love you, brother. I got love for you, but you're dead ass wrong. Okay, here we go. Cut. That's Stephen A. Smith style. So you sipping the cut. So anyway, on Gilbert's Arena, which is, I guess, a podcast with Gilbert Arenas, Rashad McCants. They have a young sister from the WNBA who I wasn't familiar with. I had to look her up. And Lord, I want to call him Yellow Boy because that's what he called himself. What's his name?
Kenya Martin.
Kenyon Martin, right? Yeah, from
He used to have the lip tattoo on his neck.
Exactly.
I think Trina.
Exactly.
So much.
So they're arguing about the response. They play the response, and then they start arguing about this GOAT conversation. And in the heat of the arguments, I thought that Kenyon Martin made some very poignant reflections on, he wouldn't call it the nature of genealogy, because he wouldn't talk about genealogy. He said, I'm listening to y'all, I'm enjoying this debate, but I don't even have a argument in it because I think about them generationally, but only in their generation. So Wilt, that's their generation. Maybe George Mikan, that's that generation, whatever. Dr. J, that's that generation. Michael Jordan, that's that generation. Kobe, that's that generation. That's my generation. I played against him. He's the best ball player I ever seen. Blah, blah, blah. He said, but LeBron, that's their generation. He was talking, but they weren't having it. They was trying to say, no, Kobe should be in the top 2, top 3. He could even be number 1. Rashad McCants just got a dog with a bone. And then Gilbert Arenas said something. Well, the title GOAT didn't even exist before. And then Rashad McCants, when did it start? He said it was a woman who named it. Really? And he said, when? He said the 90s. And at that moment, I thought, none of you remember Muhammad Ali. As plain as day. Even if you just want to use that moniker, I am the greatest of all time. Muhammad Ali put an S on it. I'm the greatest of all times. I mean, but y'all don't remember. This is literally where that GOAT came. No. And they just kept going. And I thought to myself, wow, but you said something, of course, here we are at 201. You said something in the course of 200, just a casual remark. And you've been saying this kind of as this pod sphere has emerged. Journalism is dead. And it's stuck with me the whole time. And when he said that, it popped up in my head again, because I'm wondering for you and for us through you, what you mean by that.
That, I mean, it's it's self-explanatory, but yeah, no,
Or not. People might
no,
not
no,
pick it
but
up.
and I'm gonna say sitting with you, it's beyond journalism. When you talk about the Domas and the Djalis and the teachers of ancient times, those were the original journalists in our community. Those were the keepers of news and information. It was the way in which news and information got disseminated, and there was a trusted source. It was a trusted source. So when, I think of myself as a journalist, which I am not on the radio, which I'm not even in this space. I am something different in this space. But when I was a practicing journalist, Pulitzer Polk Award winning journalist,
Come
when I
on.
was doing that work for me and I had to grow into it, there was a grave responsibility, first of all, to my community, right? Even in my 20s, I understood that as a Black person going out, talking to people and getting their information, whether it was Sharon, the mother of Yusef Salam, during that time. And there's a conflict because I'm at a newspaper that had on the front page Wilding. They had already convicted these 5 young men. In my spirit, I knew it wasn't right. And speaking with Sharon and being in her presence, I knew it was wrong. And I'm 20 something years old. I'm not fighting the establishment, but
Mm.
these are the things that I bring into now my future because I remember that. I remember the shooting, the school shooting, one of the first school shootings, 2 kids killed in Brooklyn. I was there, and Jesse Jackson, everyone. I was there, and had a full page expose on that incident because I found a young man who had been shot previously. Like those things inform the future. And what I see now, there's no institution. Everything is corporately run. Bezos owns the Washington Post. I don't know what the New York Times is funded by, but it's always kind of been a little sketchy in its funding and its allegiance. It's not to the people. I grew up in an era of Walter Cronkite, who was a news reader, but also someone that you could trust. There's a difference between people who read the news and people who go out and get the news. A Dan Rather, who may be in the trenches or whatever, is different than a Walter Cronkite who sits and reads from a teleprompter the way so many.
The metaphor Gil Scott Heron gave, I got my Gil on today for reasons we'll get into later on, but Gil Scott Heron called him Walter Concrete. For that very reason, I think it was a mixed metaphor. Like, this guy's as solid as kind. All old Black people trust Walter Cronkite. Even if it's wrong, you just had this sense of gravitas. Like, he got that paper, and so Gil Scott Heron called him Walter Concrete. You can't move him.
Right.
Right.
But
Right.
we don't have that today. There's like
Mm.
no trusted source. And for me, because I understand what journalism should be, at least I'm going to try to get it right all the time. Somebody say, "Oh, you're getting paid by the Democratic Party." Nope, they don't even advertise on Urban View. So
Yeah, those
miss
folks,
me with that. The DNC ain't even advertising. We don't get no money from the DNC. I'm
people are
going to tell you
opening
the
their
truth,
mouths.
though.
They're opening their mouths and putting their brains on display. We all do. That's all. We all do that. That's not an insight, but clearly they don't listen. They didn't listen to you talking with Jamie Harrison. They didn't listen to you talk. I mean, it's like this guy's the chair of the DNC. But there's nobody. And we saw what happened to Mehdi Hassan finally deciding, yeah, I'm out. That, this is not about getting anything right. It's all entertainment at this point and trying to be hew to the profit margin. Because what happened to Mehdi Hassan at MSNBC is clearly a declaration that we are not for journalism. And of course, good old country boy Joe Scarborough has brought back his disheveled friend Chris Matthews. And so it's also clear that there's a patriarchy and racism involved in this too. So what you're talking about, getting a thing right, we're not, look, within our formations, we need all our best thinking. And that means sometimes we're going to rub up against each other and brush each other and bump each other, but iron sharpens iron. But for someone to say that you are on the dole of the Democratic Party, or me or anyone else, well, they're opening their mouths and they're putting their brains on display. They're telling you what they haven't read, what they haven't heard. The Egyptians would make a distinction between hearing and listening. It's like they went in your ear, but you didn't process it. You didn't think, or you got some things that you probably need to work out with a trusted counselor. Just work it out. But when you turn on a camera or turn on a microphone and are trying to have a public therapy session, then everybody can hear. And you forget that the very quote unquote audience that you say is discerning. So that even to say something like that is it's a little disappointing, because that means people are not listening to you.
Well,
Or at
now
least if you say that. There are many more who do. You know
Again,
what
I
I'm
have
saying?
to keep reminding myself, narrow is the road that leads to salvation. Few will
It is.
travel it. Because I feel like that road requires something of you to travel that road to salvation, to
It is.
freedom, to knowledge, to discovery of self. It requires something. It requires that what you are talking about, the discipline to listen, to sit and examine. We're not conditioned to do that, and some of it is not our fault. It's the
Oh
way
no.
the capitalist society that we're in, it functions. It makes money off of our ignorance. It demands our ignorance. It demands us to be low vibrational ignorant people who react to things so that they can sell the next product, the next iPhone with a different color. They need that. They need you to be ignorant. So the work to not be ignorant. Now I want to shout out every Nubian that is here, because that's work and sacrifice.
That's right.
Everyone that pays for radio just for Urban View, that's
No,
work and sacrifice, because it's not necessarily in people's budgets, but
right.
your liberation should be in your budget.
Right. Yeah, and shout out for real, like you say, at the top of the year to renew and to join, after it's done. And again, we're in a society where this is a real sacrifice for a lot of people. For others, it's just a thing. It's an automatic deduction. It's a one time. You don't think about it again until January 2025, inshallah, as the Muslims would say. Or you don't. But for others, it's like, I have to make a sacrifice. And so, you take that as or more seriously than anybody I know, and across the board. And of course, for all of us involved, that means that we, must 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 honor that sacrifice with our efforts. And so even with this, I mean, we have to do it. When you said journalism is dead, that's exactly what I thought you meant. That it would journalism was the point of entry, but ultimately the sacrifice, I mean, the lack of memory. We don't remember. And journalists are required to connect things, to make connections.
That's right.
So journalism isn't just dead in the potosphere, but journalism is dead at the places that used to be more trusted for journalism. And that's not to say that they ever met our standards, because we know those Black journalists that you joined in the craft, the generations before, stretching into the 19th century, and on this side of the water, the 18th century, really, but going all the way back to those Djalis and Domas, those memory keepers. That's a sacred calling, because people have to be able. That's why the Doma is different than the regular Djali, who could be the hype person. The regular Djali could tell you your family history. It didn't have to necessarily be true. It just made you feel good about your family. But when the Doma opened her mouth, when the Doma opened his mouth, whatever came out of there had to be trusted by the entire community. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Jacob Carruthers quoting Sundiata, the opening of Sundiata, when the Doma says, take down and listen to what I say exactly as I say it. This was given to me by my ancestors, who were given by their ancestors, and what I say is the truth, because we have no room for lies. And that means I don't care what you think about it. This is not a matter of opinion. That's a different
Yeah.
calling.
Listen, I being with you these last 4 years, I would be quite a different journalist as a result of our connection, because even knowing a Charles Loeb, if I had known about a Charles Loeb and all of those Black journalists when I was sitting in
Mm,
Daily News, I mean, I just think about, and I get a little angry about it, because that information would have broadened my entire, and I did some things while I was there just out of just being me. But the level of journalism that could have been, and the systems I could have put in place in that man's house, because I was in somebody else's house, but I was a force in there that could have altered a lot of things had I just known. And I hear this often with people who come into Nubia. I didn't know this when I was in high school. I wish I had known this 30 years ago. I wish I had known this information when I was in school, because we all know we would be better people and better stewards of this if information, if we knew it, especially those of us who are educators.
absolutely, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it is, to say journalism is dead is also to say it's our responsibility to resurrect a semblance of it in every space that we're in, which is the commitment to truth and dissemination of that truth. That's all journalism is, really, right?
Supposed to be, and people take great credit for it. I mean, for doing that. But when you read, like you say, when you know better than I do, when you read and listen to various sources, you realize that that's not it at all. In fact, I started to use a word that I'm trying to move the words of the market out of my mind as much as possible, because people say, well, consumers of news. No, at that point, we could click off what you're saying, because consumption, you're speaking the language of the market. In other words, you're trying to, attract clicks, attract likes, attract advertising. What does that mean? That means I'm trying to cater what I'm saying to the listener, to the reader. And that's not a bad thing on its face. But if that means that you're going to continue to shape what you're saying to the people who are quote unquote consuming, then at what point do you look back and say, I didn't say something that is factually accurate because I did not want the consumers to turn me off? And that's absolutely, I mean, we're seeing that all over the place now. I mean, we were joking before we went live here that, Cat Williams, God bless him, and this is not, we're going to talk about Cat Williams. The Cat Williams phenomenon is absolutely understandable. This is a momentary flash. And I just, for a moment, just out of curiosity, looking at the echo effect, here he is with Shannon Sharp and millions of views, expanding, and then people taking the clips, hundreds of thousands of views, expanding, then people, who don't even have a YouTube presence, hustling on, and then they get thousands of views. Then here I saw him with Willie D earlier this week, and Willie D got a couple of million views initially in the first 48 hours, expanding, because he's continuing the conversation. And I'm thinking, what happened to Kwame Brown? I'm surprised Kwame Brown got to get in it, because I mean, it was Kwame Brown. In other words, this is no barometer of this metronome. We have to never forget this consistent hewing to that clean glass of water. We've got to pour that clean glass of water. This isn't about a clean glass of water. This is gossip girls, gossip boys, and titillating, stuff, schoolyard stuff. And so here we are in 201 at the beginning of the year, Martin Luther King's birthday. As you say, Monday, the literal birthday, and this weekend, the birthday weekend, 13th of January being our regular, Saturday. A lot of people will be looking at this in 201, and I was just thinking, consistent with what we said we would do in 199 at the end of 2023, and then in 200, this year, another pivotal year in the species, thinking about what dreaming in 2024 looks like through that metronome, that lens of Martin King. And that requires us to honor the labor, that we have undertaken over the arc of our now 4 years, soon to be 4 years of work. I went back to our 46th installment, 46th, and again, in Knubia, as we continue to add people who can annotate, who can supplement, because indeed, Prof, as you said, they are breadcrumbs. But each one of the breadcrumbs leads to a whole lot of not only information, but conversation. I went back to 46. And in 46, we talked about, that was the first time we entered the conversation on the true legacy of Martin Luther King. We spent 3 hours on it. One Night in Miami had come out. We talked about that, interestingly enough. And we all saw Shirley Chisholm. There's a Shirley Chisholm biopic about to drop, and Regina King, who was one of the moving force behind the One Night in Miami pick on film on Muhammad Ali in Miami and winning the championship. The same Muhammad Ali, these brothers seem to have forgotten, called himself the greatest of all time. No shade on them after all. I mean, they're not after all journalists. They're Djalis in a sense, hype kind of men who take a memory, not Domas. And that's not a criticism of them. Again, thinking about the role of people in society. But yeah, One Night in Miami had come out. We talked about that. But that's when we did our first kind of deep dive with a lot of the books. Because remember, when we were deep in the pandemic, I pulled a lot of texts out of the working library that's around me. The vast majority of our books are in storage. And one of the things, Prof. Hunter has been demanding, really, and I agree with her wholeheartedly. It's a matter of me continuing to steadily move things out of my way in terms of working. to continue in this process. And everyone here, we're all helping each other. And one of the things y'all are helping me to do is to move those other things away, because, you know, as I often say, if I had my full working library in a physical place to be able to pull, what we've had conversations with over the last 4 years is probably 15, between 10 and 20% of the resources I had to be able to help contribute to this conversation. But we talked about a lot of those King books, a lot of the things that have been discussed about Martin Luther King. We did that in number 46, and we even got into a little bit of a conversation about the nature of the work we had undertaken. And remember, this is predating Knarrative and Knubia. And Prophet, remember, you took a call from Josie. Josie was in her car. We still in the pandemic hard. She talked about metadata capitalism and how we are in a moment where everybody's individually anchored in place, but this is allowing us to glimpse the possibility of collective work. And that's what we did deep in the pandemic. Josie joined us in that first conversation we had about Martin Luther King holiday and what it meant and the meaning of Martin Luther King. And it was titled, "What's the True Legacy of Martin King?" You come forward a year, and in number 97, we asked, what would Martin Luther King think today? And by then we had gotten deep into the study now. And I'm doing this because it's a reminder that we have built a substantial archive that is now there for us to access. And that in a society where nobody looks backward, but we use the word Sankofa, it's almost an insult to Sankofa. But in that session, in number 97, when we asked that question, you know, what would Dr. King think today? That is the question that should anchor every Martin Luther King birthday holiday ritual. In fact, holidays are rituals for remembering and for anchoring that memory to what is going on now, the momentum of memory. And that's very important. That's why every holiday, Juneteenth, Martin King, the Kwanzaa reflections, and we call them holidays, but really they're anchoring moments, rituals in our Africana Studies framework. They are moments of cultural meaning making, but that means that they are also opportunities to regain the momentum of memory. That is what is marked in that sixth category, which is, of course, movement and memory. How did or do Africans remember key moments in time and space? Movement and memory is what allows us to have a society. It is what allows racists like Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, and others to say Martin King should not have a birthday. Is he on the same Helms, I believe it was, that exquisite racist out of North Carolina, chef's kiss racist, said, you know, what, is he on the same level as George Washington? And of course, the answer to that is, of course he's not. Of course he's not. George Washington was a terrorist, was a criminal. George Washington enslaved other human beings. George Washington was a guard and an active force in a death camp, a concentration camp. I did not misspeak. Every plantation, that's a nice word. Concentration camps, because the labor there lived there and died there. They were not, sometimes they were experimented on. Shout out to all of the quote unquote founders of gynecology who were experimenting on Black women. So, and they were worked to death. Except now there are distinctions. The sisters were made to bring children into the world whose lives would be given to the death camp. The brothers were made to impregnate those sisters. And here we are in our right minds. We survived the death camp. So I'm not going to use other language. I'm going to say what it was, these concentration camps. George Washington was an owner of a concentration camp. So of course he and Dr. King can't be compared. George Washington was a fleeing felon. Shout out to my man Alton Maddox, the great ancestor. And so no, he can't be compared. Jesse Helms, your father, and all those criminals in North Carolina. You too, by saying that, have declared that you are an enemy of our common humanity. There's really no need to mince words with this. Because again, if we're talking about a DOMA standard of memory, then we're not talking about artificial meaning making that is designed to keep these hierarchies in place. And Martin King's holiday is a site, birthday holiday is a site of contestation. And it's one that we have, quite frankly, been losing. because we don't have the momentum of memory that we have. So we talked about that a lot in number 97, and it caused me, in going back and looking. And again, this is why Dr. Obenga used to always say this, never guess meta nature. Because there will be moments when we're doing our grammar and we're doing our translations and that we might say, okay, I'm gonna take a shortcut. I'm not gonna go look at the grammar. I'm not gonna go look at the dictionary. I'm just gonna kind of guess this. And you can always tell when somebody guesses because they make a leap that is unnecessary. Sometimes there are leaps that are necessary, as Dr. Beatty, who is the master teacher, would tell us all the time in here. Other times it's quite simple. Just take a second and look. So I remember looking at 97. I didn't go through minute by minute. That one's about 2 hours. But in the tagline, when you all go back and look, you'll see in the tagline that one of the phrases that emerged was "Save me, Joe Louis." And of course, I remember, Prof, how that hit you. These are Dr. King's words. And I couldn't remember where it was "Why We Can't Wait" or "Where Do We Go From Here?" Because we read "Where Do We Go From Here" in Knubia week after week going through it. Chaos of Community, his last book. And so I thought, wait a minute. I didn't take the time. So I think it's in Why We Can't Wait. And I said, no, it's not in Why We Can't Wait because I can't find it. But here, at the beginning of Why We Can't Wait, never guess meta nature. Just go to the source. This is particularly for young people who haven't had to do that, who use these fingers to hit the keystrokes and think that everything is in the computer. Everything is not in the computer. Most stuff is not in the computer. So go to the text. And this is what Dr. King says in chapter 7 of Why We Can't Wait, which was published in copywritten in 1963. This is the first paperback edition, July 1964. So this is around the time of right after the so-called March on Washington. Dr. King says this, chapter 7, the summer of our discontent. Give you the source there. Everybody can check it. He says, more than 25 years ago, one of the southern states adopted a new method of capital punishment. Poison gas supplanted the gallows. In its earliest stages, a microphone was placed inside the sealed death chamber so that scientific observers might hear the words of the dying prisoner to judge how the human reacted in this novel situation. The first victim was a young Negro. Let's just pause there. So they put the death gas on people, and the first victim of the death gas, the gas chamber, as it is called, was a person of African descent. That is so surprising, isn't it? Anyway, let's continue. As the pellet dropped into the container and the gas curled upward, through the microphone came these words: "Save me, Joe Louis. Save me, Joe Louis. Save me, Joe Louis." Dr. King writes, it is heartbreaking enough to ponder the last words of any person dying by force. It is even more poignant to contemplate the words of this boy, because they reveal the helplessness, the loneliness, and the profound despair of Negroes in that period. The condemned young Negro, groping for someone who might care for him and had power enough to rescue him, found only the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Joe Louis would care because he was a Negro. Joe Louis could do something because he was a fighter. In a few words, the dying man had written a social commentary. Not God, not government, not charitably minded white men, but a Negro who was the world's most expert fighter. In this last extremity was the last hope. Less than 3 decades later, Negroes had discovered the fighting spirit and the power each within himself. Voluntarily facing death in many places, they have relied upon their own united ranks for strength and protection. In the summer of 1963, the bizarre and naive cry to Joe Louis was replaced by a mighty shout of challenge. Helplessness was replaced by confidence as hundreds of thousands of Negroes discovered that organization, together with nonviolent direct action, was explosively, powerfully, and socially transforming. I'll stop there. The reminder of Amiri Baraka, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when he said, the Negro can't eat Ralph Bunche. In other words, these representative figures, these, for lack of a better term, goats. We talked about what these symbols mean, what these people mean. Martin Luther King is considered a goat. By some, he's considered the goat. Now, that, of course, is absurd. As Kenyon Martin said, you could look at people within the context of their generations. The Djalis of any generation should be the goats of those generations in some ways, those who create the heroic feats. We go to Kemet every summer. We're going back again. We're going back the first 2 weeks of August 2024, as the Muslims would say, inshallah. And when we go, we'll see the tombs, the temples, the pyramids, the writings, the museums. We'll look at the great achievements, and the names that we know are the names of those who were at the top of that social structure, of that social order. The Ptah-hoteps, the Imhoteps, the Jehudi Moses, the Amenhoteps the third, and Queen T, and Nefertari. And we know, of course, Hatshepsut, and all of them, Ramses II. But these are the names of the rulers and of the advanced thinkers whose words endure in the context of those rulers. There's a lot to be debated and discussed, and we do that when we're there, about the nature of social structures at that time, when the social structures that African people lived in were African, and the governance formations, who they were to each other in those structures, were also African, before the great divergences. And the critiques of power that must always be made. These are very important, but as we are in this moment, these representative figures, these types that survive the momentum of memory that we curate for each other, become people who represent not just themselves, but the hopes and dreams, desires, the fears, the full range of human emotion of a people who didn't exist before those boats came. People who didn't exist before the traumas shaped our responses to those traumas, the idea of a people not bound by blood, but bound by common experience, and if possible, through reflecting on the long arc of our existence as a species, to pull out of that arc the types of commonalities of cultural meaning making and ways of knowing that can indeed populate the idea of a people with more than just phenotype and who we are to other people. This is the challenge of Africana studies. It is not the challenge of being somehow connected to any society. It's not a geographical challenge. This is what people mess up all the time. It is a challenge of understanding how to create meaning outside of a structure that has tried to reduce you to something beneath that structure. So I want to spend a few minutes here in 201 thinking about those possibilities. And I'll start with something that happened to me earlier this week. This happened the first day of class. This is the first week. This was the first week of class for a lot of universities. Many people will go back after the Martin Luther King holiday next week in a couple of days. But for some folk, they've gone back since then. K-12 here in the United States, and there's people from all over the world, people have gone back. Some universities, like at Howard, they went back. We went back this week. And I walked into class, my 8 a.m. class on Tuesday, my Introduction to African States class. And I did what I always do, and I'm going to increasingly populate with different exercises, which I passed out my index cards. I had the students write on the index cards. And I asked them to write their names and where they were from, what year they were in school, and what they're studying. And then I asked them 2 questions that I wanted them to write. And this child wrote on both sides of the paper. I said, what do you think you want to learn in this class? And what is Africana Studies? I don't expect them to be able to answer either of those questions fully. And you never know. Sometimes students just want to come into a course because they need it for a course requirement for their various reasons. And I'm going to tell you something that happened. Because Saturday, January 13th, I'm in Indianapolis for the ritual of ascension into eternity for Mashariki, Nefertari, Jawanza, the Queen Mother in Indianapolis. A force for good, a force for our people. And her loss is not only significant for all of the reasons that we could go through, but her loss physically, Queen Mother Awusi Nomasi II is what she is known in the Volta region of Ghana. born and raised in Indianapolis. Her transition at 74 comes as a shock to all of us. And the transition that she made on the day of Imani, January the 1st of this year, at 1:36 in the morning. 1 + 3 + 6 is 10. And if you take that 10 and separate it to a 1 and a 0 and put a plus there, 1 + 0 is 1. There was a symmetry in that, even in the moment of her transition, that just reinforces the fact that in terms of our ways of knowing as African people, there's something much greater at play. I was watching our friend and brother Freddie Haynes, fellow Nubian, offering a prayer at the funeral of Eddie Bernice Johnson in Texas. And I thought about you, Baba J, Reverend Wright, as I watched your son pray. 3-hour ceremony. Watch Hakeem Jeffries, who just lost his father, Hakeem and Hassan, talking there about how when he arrived with Stephen Horsford and the others about 10 years ago in their freshman class, fresh person class in the House of Representatives, how Eddie Bernice Johnson became a mother to them. And how when he would come to the Congressional Black Caucus meetings every Wednesday at noon, she, from the first time he came in, said, "You come sit next to me." And, where I'm reading and listening to some of the folks who were closer to this, there's a lawsuit being filed on her behalf for whatever it did or didn't happen on the 31st of December and during her hospitalization. And it was a reminder that this woman, who's trained medical expert, nurse, the first in Congress, of course, Lauren Underwood is there now and other folk, but, that we're all at risk in this society. I was reading something earlier in the week in the New York Times about maternity rates among women of African descent, 9 times more likely to die during childbirth. It's unacceptable. These things the social structure has put us on, beginning in the death camps. And so thinking about the idea that in our ways of knowing, there are things beyond the thing you can see. It gives us, some people call it faith, some people call it ancestors, Aboson, some people call it, the divine order, Allah, Jehovah, God, Jesus, however you want to characterize it. But it's there. So they're writing on these cards. Tuesday morning, first day of class. And so I've gone through some of the syllabus. And I say, okay, we're going to reserve out the last part of class to have a conversation. Somebody volunteer to read what you have. And I've been asking questions all along. I got some Afro-Latino young people in the class, including one young sister from Mexico. It's going to be a great class. Some young people from Cameroon, of course, Nigeria all the time, many of the islands of the Caribbean in this class. I got over 100 students, which is small for me, but I'm sure that a lot more will be added in the first week or two, couple of weeks, week 2. They tried to cap the class, and it always amazes me, and I think we all know this in every walk of life, when folk enter an institution and they think they know better than the people who have been doing it all along. I just laugh at them now. Having jailbroken the Black University, it's certainly very liberating for me. But y'all keep experiencing things, and then you realize that we knew what we were doing all along. This is the height of disrespect in terms of genealogies. It plays everywhere. Again, the momentum of memory. You can't dream without some content to dream from. So when people say, I don't look backward, what they're saying is, I've opened my mouth, I've opened it, and now you can see my brain. And it should cause you great sorrow. I don't look back. You don't look back? Look back every day. Say it again. I don't look back. Okay. The I, first person singular pronoun. You create the language. You must not have, because if it's your language, I wouldn't understand it unless you taught me. But we learned I from somebody else, right? So even your words give the lie to what you said. You don't look backward. Every word come out your mouth is evidence of backward. It's language. Don't do that. Don't do that. But what we can't do is listen to people who somehow think that the momentum of memory is either useless or not important. And so everybody gets up I mean, not gets up. I'll make them stand. It's a big auditorium we're in. Ernest Everett Just. And nobody knew who Ernest Everett Just was, which is not unusual. But there were some biology majors in there who didn't know who he was. And of course, we've talked about Ernest Just in here. Y'all can go through and look in the archive. The great biologist, the great stem cell scientist from out of South Carolina, and educated at Dartmouth, won the NAACP award, not the Image Award. I'm not sure what that is, other than a series of advertisements for companies. Because even looking at the candidates every year and looking at who wins, I'm like, this is a fundraiser, which is, of course, what they say. But the Spingarn Medal, which is a different thing, certainly was a different thing when Ernest Just won it. So I'm, listening to these young people from all over the world, all over the African world. And there's some non-Africans in there who, it's a good mix of students. And it's time to go. We got about a minute, literally. It's like 9:29. We got at 9:30. And so there's a young sister who is sitting in the front on the right-hand side in the auditorium, just sitting there one row back from the front. She puts her hand up. I said, yeah, tell us who you are. She said, everybody listen very carefully. She said, my name is Naila Rusanunko Taylor. I'm a senior business administration major from Indianapolis, Indiana. I said, I'm going to be in Indianapolis Friday and Saturday. For my mother, Mashariki Jawanza. You know what this child said? She said, I know. This is what she wrote. I like to get the Dr. Carr experience from this class. My grandfather has told me that I'll one day look back and know that I had a legend for a professor in my days at Howard. So if I make it a point, to make it a point to take your class before I graduated, I think Africana Studies is a historical view into the history of African culture from a nonfiction perspective, similar to the teachings of white history, but instead Black history from Black perspectives. That's her initial. But the point is, I said, who is your grandfather? She told me. She said, this is where the Rusanuko comes from. He changed his name back in the 70s. This Mashariki's people. Not conceptually, literally. I had no idea that child was coming to that class. I don't care what none of y'all say. I know there's some agnostics, some atheists, and those are ways of knowing too. I honor them, I respect them, and I absolutely reject them because I know better. Or better yet, I don't reject them. I embrace them as an attempt to say, I don't know yet. But to attribute that to coincidence is absurd. So I'm going to see all her people later on when we are in the ritual Saturday. And so, it is a reminder. We start talking about dreaming. What is the vision? Because the universities are not going to save us. Black, white, indigenous, Chinese, continental African, Caribbean, European, not going to save us. Because they are literally created to replicate the class structures that feed them. And there's a great deal of good that comes out of the thinking work at universities, but they're not going to save us. No one institution can. What's going to save us is us, as Martin Luther King said. Joe Lewis not going to save you. You can't eat Ralph Bunche. The symbols can't save you, but what those representative types can do is remind us of what we have done collectively, because they are representative types. They are not aliens, which brings me to the next point. My second class of the day was my hip-hop class. I'm too old to be teaching hip-hop class. That's not true. I always tell the young people, I'm not too old to teach hip-hop class. But because I'm not interested in keeping up with the proliferation, particularly because of technology, of every little this and baby this and da-da-da this. And no. Although I know a great deal of it, I know that there's a great deal more that I don't know. And I said, that's why y'all are taking this class. We use this class to anchor your analysis, your enjoyment, your critiques of what we are calling hip hop in the momentum of memory so that we can connect those things over the arc of generations. If Kenyon Martin says Will Chamberlain was the greatest of his era, Michael Jordan was the greatest of his era, Kobe Bryant was the greatest of his era, which is the era that he played in, and that LeBron James is, and he's not going to string them together to look through them, I reject that as a concession to laziness in a way, because every generation will create its own meaning, hence the category in our Africana Studies framework, cultural meaning making. However, it is the momentum of memory, however you curate it, however you think about it, that allows us to discover meaning in our common humanity across time and space. So you have to engage. In fact, the fact they were engaging in that debate at all is evidence to the fact that Kenyon Martin is in it too. And I'm saying that in the context of this hip hop course because, you know, and of course, the class starts at 3:40. So we're in there at 3:40. And about 10 minutes into the class, the students tell me, Dr. Carr, we just got a message. They all got their computers and their cell phones. University is closing at 4 o'clock. They said we're going to all virtual at 4. Why? Because it's raining, been raining. So what time is the rain supposed to stop? 1 a.m. Oh, well, we here now. Oh, they worry about flooding. We figured it out. Okay. They're worried about flooding. Okay. So anybody who needs to go, we pray traveling mercies for you and please leave. But I'm here now. I'm gonna get rained on anyway. So I'm gonna stay. I'll be here if anybody wants to stay. Plus, what we're gonna do, go virtual. I said, so technically that means that at 4 o'clock, we could all open our computers. I could go on Zoom from up here and we could just look at our computers at each other and we would be satisfying the mandate. They all started laughing. I said, we're not gonna do it. Everybody relax. So I'm not gonna send y'all out into the storm and try to look in your phone on the way home. No. But those who want to stay. I'm gonna stay, and I did. It's something about the rain that calms. And I had just come from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the SAM, in Chinatown. And I'd gone there. Actually, my teaching assistant, Miss Carter, Ainsley Carter from Philly, is working on a dissertation this semester. We had both gone down there because we're looking at we got a project that we've been assigned by an elder that I kind of roped her into it. I, basically told the elder, nah, she's very good. She can help you. And then through her helping him, then he was like, okay, I want you to come in at a point later on down the road and look at this. So we're looking at sites. We went over to the Martin Luther King Library, one of my favorite places in the district. And I was talking to one of the main archivists there, good brother. So we're comparing notes. I said, hey, have you seen this Arthur Jafa exhibit over at the SAM? And she said, no, I haven't. I said, well, let's go by there since we down here and then going back to campus. So we went by there. There is I remember I told you all a couple of weeks ago, the 28-minute film by the African-British filmmaker. His name escapes me at the moment if I'm quiet for a moment. It's on Frederick Douglass. It's called in the matter of the hour, the course of the hours. It'll come to me in a minute. I see his face. We sat and watched that. Very interesting to watch that with an interracial group. And then we went to the Jafa. It's a 7.5 film called Love is the Message. The Message is Death. It's just clips taken from the internet of different people, different clips, of Black people in moments of joy, moments of praise, moments of trauma. So you see Black people dancing, and you see somebody with a little hip hop, and then you see Walter Scott getting shot in the back, and then you see Miles Davis, so you see Louis Armstrong embracing Ella Fitzgerald, or you see Nina Simone or Venus Williams doing the crip walk there at Wimbledon the first time she won the title, and then you see these funky punk cops making this black woman get out of the car and walk backward, and then her children are getting out too, and say, "You terrifying my children." And then you see another clip of someone else, and underneath it is Kanye West. This is a God dream. This is a God dream. Mm-hmm. And you hear these. So love is the message. We're constant. And so I said, we're in here. We're flooded out. We stuck here now. Turn off the lights. Turn off the lights. I'm going to run Love is the Message. The message is death, because the first question we're going to raise in this course is, what is hip hop? We can't start what is hip hop without regaining the momentum of memory. So I want to think about the underlying modality of hip hop and what that means. Turn off the lights, put it on. Afterwards, we had a conversation. And something Ms. Carter had said at the museum emerged differently in the conversation that we were having in the class. And those of you who went to Kimber with us, y'all know Ms. Carter. That's my left and right hands. We were all together on the blue bus. Sitting there, after it was over, Ms. Carter said, "I hate these kind of films." Well, why you say that? In her dissertation, she's working on Philadelphia International Records. She's looking at cultural meaning making. She and Stephanie Tisdale are taking that African States framework to the next level by applying it in research contexts. It's very important to understand. That's for my academic friends who might want to cling to the idea that somehow getting a couple of degrees makes us somehow better than people at thinking. And absolutely, I am so fully dead set against that as to be almost for it. It's like 359 degree. I'm damn near at. Anyway, the point is this. She said, I don't, she says, because in these moments, it reminds me, and this is the thing, she's not a child, in her 20s, but I just thought about it, This is what she said. She said, we left our ancestors. What do you mean? We left our ancestors. Isaac Julian is the filmmaker who made the Frederick Douglass film that is now on the second floor of the National Portrait Gallery. I knew it would come to me. Isaac Julian. He said, we left our ancestors. What do you mean? She said, that film shows all of the genius of our cultural meaning making, our dance, our song, our speech, the way we move. You see, James Brown at the end going down on the stage, coming back up. But what we do with it, we knew what to do with it in Africa. This is the genius of Dan Black in his work, Baba Omotosho, The Coming. This is the genius. She said, but here we do all the stuff we were doing before. We've adapted it, we've changed some of it, but fundamentally that cultural meaning making is still at play. Those ways of knowing are still. There's a clip in there where you see he starts with, teach me how to Dougie. Teach me how to Dougie. You see black people, and then so he's looking like there's this clip that you see this elders dancing like they doing an electric slide kind of dance, and there's this little boy who's behind, looks like his grandmother doing the same. Teach me how to Dougie. It's almost like they're doing kind of communal dance. It's a beautiful thing. And then the next clip you see some minstrels dancing. Black people, teach me how to Dougie. You see that clip, and then you see Burt Williams jump in of it, and then he comes back to somebody's twerking. So we see it, and she said, well, we left our ancestors. Why? Because what's not in any of the clips are Africans outside of the United States, which is okay, understandably, because it's everywhere now. The derisive word that is often used in West Africa coming out of the Yoruba people, the way I understand it initially, akata, almost like wild, no culture, which is often used to describe black people in the United States who have no culture. But that's absolutely not true. But hell, there's no culture now all over the damn African world. Everybody's just out there acting crazy, using the culture. But if you leave your ancestors, you've left the playbook for why you use the culture. It's a very interesting thing. So I'm showing this, and I didn't say anything to them about what she has said, and said, what do y'all think? And we sat there for 30 solid minutes in the dark, and then I turned the lights up just a little because I didn't want to turn the lights right back up because this thing is so moving. If you ever get a chance to see it, maybe we'll show it in Knubia. We can talk about it one night. But I tell you, the conversation was like, we see the genius of our people and the love we want for each other is there. It's all throughout hip hop. But if you don't have the foundation, the expression of love in a social structure that is absolutely committed to your death, One of the clips very quickly is, remember when Barack Obama, and I told you I was eating a turkey burger in Lower Manhattan, just come from the bookstore, Mercer Street Books over there by NYU, having taken out probably $150 worth of books. And I got both, I think, full of books, these used books. And I'm sitting there eating this turkey burger. And I looked up, watching the funeral of most of the Charleston Nine, including Senator Clementa Pinckney. And this is when Barack Obama was standing at the podium. Amazing grace. And Vashti McKenzie and them sitting behind him, all the bishops of the AME Church, and they stand up. And then, so Arthur Jafa, AJ as Haile Gerima calls him, because Jafa was Haile Gerima's student, shows this clip and then moves very quickly to the next clip. So it's a bit there. And I thought about that because, of course, earlier this week, we saw the mummy, Joe Biden, in the pulpit of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Charleston, in a speech that was disrupted by people in the audience who were saying that he's Genocide Joe. Of course he is, all that. And then, of course, Congressman Jim Clyburn was there, and he gave remarks. And, of course, I've been in that church. That's where it said, Brother Cedric, shout out to you, Brother Cedric, down there in Brazil, you and your wife and children. That's when he got married. And I was honored to be able to, he asked me to pour libation down there. So, South Carolina is very strong, been very strong in our minds always. And so, Joe Biden's there and he gets erupted. And there's been a debate. I watched some of this debate this week on social media, people saying, yeah, that's why we're not voting for them. Hey. I don't argue with people on electoral politics that way. I think you have to pour a clean glass of water. Think tactic, think strategy, think a lot of things, because it's very complex. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the context of Martin King in a minute as I kind of wind this to where we want to go today in terms of this question of dreaming in 2024. And then there was people saying, well, it was the wrong place. It was the pulpit. It was the church. We say there is no wrong place. I agree. There is no wrong place. I also know African ways of knowing. And as I looked at that multiracial crowd and looked at particularly some of the most vocal people in that church, I'm wondering, for some of y'all, this is the first time y'all been in here. Do y'all even from this place? Do you even know the protocol? And you think about, is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? No, I don't know that there is a right and wrong way in terms of protocol. But again, if we're going to look at this in an Africana studies framework, from the framework of governance, we have to ask ourselves those questions and have the real debates and come into them with, as Baba Mariba Kelsey would say, agreeing to agree. Let us agree to agree. Let us come to the place where we're coming in here not to fight, but to agree. We're going to be some things we're not going to be able to agree on, perhaps, but if we go in with that spirit, we can come to some consensus. And I have to tell myself that as well, because it's very easy to get pulled into this beef / gossip girls / rapier of criticism, but criticism with the illusion, buzzwords like character and principle that can almost, think about Lewis Gordon, the philosopher, African philosopher, Lewis Gordon, philosopher of African descent, Lewis Gordon, talks about bad faith and good faith. And you begin to mistrust people's intentions. So I have to watch myself too, and to remember just to agree to agree. Let's get to consensus, to agreement. And so I'm saying all that in the context of things that happened this week that reminded me and continue to remind me that if we can be still and think with each other and use the momentum of our memory by reflecting, we can begin to emerge with some consensus that will dream us forward. We can dream and act in ways that will propel us forward, not only as people of African descent, but as a species. And so finally, as the class ended, after we had spent a good solid 30 minutes unpacking that film, what emerged was the genius of our people through the mouths of these students. As they said, so much was familiar in there, and it's a reminder that these modalities of our cultural meaning making have been what have allowed us to exist, but that we've had to use so much of it simply to not go crazy in this social structure, that we can easily lose sight of the idea that that's the purpose of doing it. That the purpose of doing it isn't just to exist, but to be fully. And it was almost as if they articulated what Angela Carter had said in a phrase. We left our ancestors. We've got to recover our ancestors, not because they were perfect, but because they are part of the momentum of our memory and they allow us to become better. And so with that in mind, here we are, Martin Luther King weekend, and here we are with the Martin Luther King birthday being on the 15th. And we remember that Dr. King, who we talked about extensively, go to the archive again, go to 46, 97, and go to the one we did last year, 149, where on that Martin Luther King holiday weekend, it was in the context of the selling of Bruce's Beach. It just sold Bruce Beach. We talked about reparations, what happened with the selling back of Bruce's Beach. There's a beautiful portrait now painting of Queen Mother Opal Lee, known as the mother of Juneteenth, at the National Portrait Gallery. We saw it yesterday. It's been recently acquired by the NPG. And in looking at it, it was very interesting because it's right next to a self-photograph of Betty Saar, the great artist. And looking at those two sisters, everybody's stopping at the portrait that was also recently acquired across the hall, right across from them, of Oprah Winfrey, the large in a purple dress. By the way, I saw in the Financial Times, I think it was on Monday, that the attendance numbers for the Color Purple have cratered. I think they made around $5 million in week 2 after making nearly $20 million in week 1, $19 million. And they were speculating as to why the numbers have cratered. And apparently it costs like $120 or $130 million, the Color Purple, but $40 million of that was in marketing. And in fact, there's an excellent book that I picked up called Purple Rising. Y'all can see that, Purple Rising. Very interesting book. Purple Rising, celebrating 40 years of the magic, power, and artistry of the Color Purple. This is the behind the scenes book. But I got this because it isn't just about the film. It's about the previous film. So it's not just the 2023 film. It's about the Broadway plays. It's about the context in which the book was written. So the 1985 film, and before that, the Pulitzer.
Can you hold this up again one more time? Because this book was published to coincide. This is part of the marketing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so the goal is for us to go get the book and do what's supposed to happen.
Well, let me ask you, Prof, because again, this is another of your worlds. Do you know these people at Atria?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course I do that. I had the opportunity to either be with Pocketbooks, which turned into Gallery, or Atria, when I was deciding which place I would have my imprint. And I picked the place that would leave me alone. Because, Atria, they think they know Black people.
No question.
So then I'm going to have to field your impression of what you think Black people should want to know as a white person, because there are no Black people in charge of those spaces. But now I think they've put blackface there. But yeah, at the time I was like, yeah, let me be with the person who's an open, disliker of Black people, who's going to get out of my way and not question anything because they don't care about Black people, because they told me they don't care. So that's good. As long as you don't care. If you don't care about something, I care deeply. Give me the keys. Let's go. I'm going to drive this car.
See, look, y'all, this again, our gratitude will be eternal, but this is why we have this space. It has to be a conversation, because I didn't know any of that. And it makes so much sense, not only to hear you describe out of this social structure the objectives and purposes, but also to describe out of your governance sensibility what you would and wouldn't do to maintain your ability to be self-determining. Again, you talk about all the time, practicing the principles of Kwanzaa year-round. Kujichagulia, self-determination. Yeah, we can't get cooperative economics out of that. We can't get Ujamaa out of that, or collective working responsibility out of that. But we can certainly move towards self-determination. And that's fascinating to hear you say that, because this is how we begin to understand that we are in the world we live in. We can't leave that world. To dream and not be faced and confront that reality is absurd. That's a fantasy. At the same time, we don't have to concede to the material conditions that we live in as inevitable. This is why, Angie Carter was like, we left our ancestors, meaning what? We got all the dances, we got all the music, but behind that conviction and that purpose, not just to exist, but to be, has been muddled. And those young people in the hip hop class began to see that too. And we're going to spend all semester. But we're going to tie, we see in fact, it's so funny. There's a little clip Jafa puts in there. And remember that Farrakhan interview with Mike Wallace, when Mike Wallace is doing what Mike Wallace did, which is, he said, it's like Nigeria. I've been in Nigeria, one of the most corrupt nations in the world. And then Farrakhan says, "Oh, Mr. Wallace." And then, "You shouldn't say that." And then And then and then Mike Wallace says, well, can you name another one? He said, I'm sitting in one. And then he just
Yes.
roasts the United States. You have no moral authority. The blood on your hand. You know, only fair. In fact, I sent some pictures to Sala, Mashriki's youngest daughter, of when we were in Cobra, just before John Conyers made transition, and Minister Farrakhan spoke at the banquet that night. And I got a couple of pictures of Mashriki with the minister that I sent for the photo montage, and it just made me think about it. But Arthur Jafa doesn't do all that. He only takes about 2 seconds of it. The part he puts, he says, "Oh, Mr." And then goes quickly to a 17-year-old Christopher Wallace, Biggie, on the corner of Brooklyn, freestyling on the oh, Mr. Wallace. And then goes with, but the point there, of course, you're saying, here's the genius of Christopher Wallace, but, and then the young people start talking and say, you know, and here's a trigger warning. I'm gonna use a few Biggie lyrics. One of these young brothers was in the class, class on Tuesday, and says, you know, one of the things we have to do, we can't romanticize hip hop. People talk about Tupac. I met Tupac because of Mashriki Jawanzas. We talked about that. That was a whole story for another day. But, you know, in fact, I met Tupac, he's 22. And Christopher Wallace, of course, in his early 20s, 17 in that clip. And what the young brother said was, you know, the genius is there, the wordplay, the kind of moving, and you know, all the rhythm. But then what are you using it for? When you give a line like, and here it is, you know, I like them young, fresh, and green with no hair in between, who got it going on, the weak or the strong, you're dead wrong. Hell, you're rhyming about pathology. And yet somehow that can get airbrushed. You see a young Beyonce dancing out of her in her motel room, dancing on the, you know, for a second, and it's very quick. I said, y'all catch Beyonce? And yes, anybody here from Houston? 3 hands went up in the back. And of course, you know, we did one of the in classes talking about the Shape Center, and they know exactly where that was. And so, what was that group she was in? Girls Time. They started talking. These are young people from Houston connecting this to, and I said, but then you get to the point where, you know, you with your husband Hove, and I'm not gonna talk about Aaliyah or young Beyonce. I guess I did, didn't I? But the point is this: when you create goats and when you create icons, the question is, what are you using them to elevate? And what Jafa is doing in this film is putting together, you got Drake in there, but you're putting together people who people recognize with other people, and the young people in there recognize Louis Armstrong, but they don't know the backstory of Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong is the GOAT of his generation in so many ways. Is Louis Armstrong the Drake of his generation? You could make that argument, especially if he records Hello Dolly, and it becomes the biggest selling record of all time at the time. But the point is that Jimi Hendrix shows up in there again. But the point is that if you don't know how these things connect with each other over the momentum, and that they all emerge from something that predates the trauma, the signal trauma of the attempt to erase all of the momentum of our memory, then you end up in places like where you create these things which are curated by a social structure that don't give a damn about you, even though it seems like people are not coming the same. And here's the last quote, as you see our sister here, of course, started with American Idol, of course, Fantasia Barrino, plain silly. But here, look at this quote. This quote from Blitz Bazawule. That's the director, right? I'm not sure. We have earned our way into another version of this film. Like consumer of news, the market. We have earned our way. Were you born? Yes. Are you breathing? Yes. You have earned your way to, as the 103rd Street Band would say, express yourself. We're going to talk about that in hip hop class, of course. That's from the 60s. We tell you, if people say they're from the 60s, you just get quiet. They start listening, okay? And of course, that sample is then used by Express Yourself, Dr. Dre, and NWA. Not After Police, not even Dope Man, but Dre starts that with, and of course, Ice Cube wrote those lyrics. I'm expressing to my full capabilities. Now I'm living in correctional facilities. Save me, Joe Louis. Save me, Joe Louis. But in that video, if you ever see the video for Express Yourself, using that clip from the Watch Band from the Black Power era, this is the era of Mashariki Jawanza, you see them come forward, and it's sampled by NWA, which is curated as completely pathological. However, when you listen to the words and you see the video, you see them, they're starting in a plantation. And you got these young boys picking cotton, and this white boy has the whip on him, and then you see one of the young boys pick up a rock like he gonna throw it, and then you see NWA bust into the scene. That's when Dre says, you know, I'm expressing to my full capabilities. Now I'm living in correctional facilities. And so then the next scenes, you see that same white figure who was on the horse, same actor plays a cop. And he's coming down the street. Then a businessman, he's coming down the street. Reminds me of Eric B. and Rakim's Move the Crowd, where you see them within a meeting of the 5% Nation, a community meeting, and then a political campaign, and Eric B. is running for president. I mean, Rakim running for president. I mean, this is earlier hip-hop in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And this, and as we talked about yesterday, it doesn't make it better than what's going on now because the impulse is still there. But like Ms. Carter said, we have left our ancestors, and in this case, most of them people not even ancestors. Trugoy the Dove, of course, from De La Soul is, and there are others who have made transition. Trouble T. Roy, of course, when they reminisce over you, of course, Pete Rock and CL Smooth. There are some ancestors from the hip hop era, but even the ones before them, like the members of that 103rd Street Band, that did Express Yourself, within they could take that sample and move it forward, and we still use all that thing. So when this director says we have earned our way into another version of this film, yeah, and not because of the largesse of people who want to profit off you and keep you with certain tight narratives. I haven't seen the 2023 film yet, Dr. Goddess. I haven't seen the 2023 film yet, but I'm going to watch it. And I'm going to compare it to the 1985 film, neither of which were made by us. Now, I know people would say technically they're made by us, but they weren't made by us. They were made by Hollywood. We don't yet have, and don't even, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to edit myself. I'm not going to say that because it's not necessary. Sometimes, as the Yoruba was saying, the Odu Ifa, to make a point, you don't have to use up all the words in your mouth. So I'm going to let that marinate. But I'm going to finish this quote. We have earned our way into another version of this film. What? It will be this generation's Color Purple. Okay, that sounds like Kenyon Martin. I'm not going to compare generation. It'll be this generation's Color Purple. When did Color Purple become the metronome for African ways of knowing? It isn't, because it's a social structure film, not a governance film. With all of the ways of knowing that are going to be in the film, all of the cultural meaning making in the film, and the truncated, curated moments of movement and memory in the film, it is still a film that is called forth by the social structure. That's why Knubia gonna get in the film business and narrative, right? So hopefully another generation will come, and if they find any problems, they will be brave enough to take another swing and make it theirs. Okay, so you do understand the momentum of memory, but why are we starting with that? Because you act like these relationships, this is why we have ancestors like Julia Hare, who with her husband, who's still with us, Nathan Hare, talked about black female-male relationships. Why are you starting our relationships with each other with enslavement? And so then you create a figure who, in spite of the framing context that he was placed, and the script that he was given, and the book that script was based on, Danny Glover figures out a way to try to create some level of complexity in Mr. in 1985. Now, I haven't seen what Coleman Domingo is going to do. I saw a couple of clips and was thoroughly convinced that this is indeed this generation's Color Purple, because it's a very different vibe I got from those films, but from those clips. But I got to see the whole film, although I suspect that it will confirm what I saw, because again, I'm not going to judge it without seeing it, even though I know the social structure it came from. And remember, the book comes out before. I wrote in my senior thesis at Tennessee State about the Color Purple in the context of protest novels, but I didn't read it through the gendered lens, although I took that into account. I was very young, 22 years old, sitting up in Epps Hall, Merle Raymond Epps Hall. Merle Epps, the great black historian who wrote The Negro 2 in American history back in the 50s. But I'm sitting in Epps Hall in the summer of 1986, writing my senior thesis, reading all these novels, The Baldwin and the Wrights, and and The Color Purple had just come out the year before, the film based on the novel. And I'm looking and reading The Color Purple, and then looking at the film, and I'm watching all of this pathology, and I'm watching all of this resistance to pathology in real time through the actors, the Adolph Caesars and the Danny Glovers, and the Margaret Averys, who played Suge Avery. Less so the Whoopi Goldberg, who's not a trained actress, because my theater was my major, so I'm already got my nose up about people who not actors, but who were emoting and doing this kind of thing. But I'm looking at this ensemble, but I'm looking at the narrative, and when I read through this, I'm much more interested in the class issues in The Color Purple, the attempts to build black institutions, whether it be Harpo Jew Joint or Seeley taking in sewing, and trying to put together. I'm interested in this African element that was in the book, and I see a glimpse of it in the 1985 film. Apparently, in the 2023 film, it's been expanded. I've seen some bunch of people in kente cloth look like they was dancing on the beach. I'm saying, here we go again. I'd much rather have seen that from Coming to America. At least in there, we knew we was going in as a satire. You're not trying to overburden it. I'm not sure what you're trying to mash up in this version, because again, it is now completely acceptable and celebrated to be African. It's stripped of its politics, which is why the hope of the African filmmaking globe is probably in Africa. I'm going to go with Nollywood, because these Hollywood Negroes now can wrap you in swaddling kente and drive you straight off a cliff. Even have some African words in it. But anyway, the point is this. Our momentum of memory has to be recovered by us. Acts of self-determination, whether we agree or disagree on everything in them, must be made by a collective that has at its heart the consensus that we're going to try to agree to agree. We're going to agree to agree. That's what Baba Marie would say. Don't say try. Say we're going to agree to agree. And that we're trying to move for our liberation, because love is the message. But in a context where you are oppressed by a system that relies on your oppression to keep itself going, vampiric system, the message is death. And we got to break out of that. As Miss Carter said, we got to return to our ancestors, because we are our ancestors. And so here on this Dr. King birthday weekend, with the knowledge that in 2027 the FBI files will be opened, and with the knowledge that when the debate was being had to create the holiday, one of the ways that the racists in Congress, including Jesse Helms, tried to stop the holiday, the federal holiday, was to say that, you know, he was being surveilled by the FBI, and if he wasn't a communist, he was communist adjacent, and he's a reprobate. And they tried to get the files unsealed to try to stop. Like, if you're going to hear something in these tapes, it's going to make you say, I don't want Martin Luther King no more. And I'm like, yeah, y'all better be real careful, because, you know, we know there ain't no double standard. There's one standard. That one standard is whiteness, because your people can be whole bred, purebred criminals, reprobates, freak, anti-people, anti-child, all this kind of stuff. And you just wait 5 minutes, or not even wait. In the case of Donald Trump, you just bull forward, and that becomes a badge of honor. So don't play with us. But in thinking about this holiday this week, and on Monday, the day of the holiday, we're of course going to be reading W.E.B. Du Bois's 1930 speech at Howard, Education and Work, because last week, as we know, we remember we did Diaturney Salenti, his 1924 speech at Fisk, the 100th anniversary of which will be coming up in May. It caused me to want to pause as we kind of finish up today and think about Dr. King. Think about Dr. King's life, and think more importantly for this moment, as we do every year for this convening, about the episodes that led to the creation of this moment. Because what I always do, the Thursday of my classes, the first week of classes, is talk about the formation of the King holiday. That's why I wore my Gil Scott Heron hoodie, Brother Gil, because Gil Scott Heron in his book, let's see, yep, in his memoir, The Last Holiday, published posthumously, talked about how Stevie Wonder led that movement to get Martin Luther King's birthday holiday. So I always play that, play Stevie Wonder's testimony before Congress. And each generation moving forward, I also play, some of y'all remember this, I pulled up the Knubia app. So who agrees? Not agrees. Agreement to agreement. I saw Michelle's comment. Right, we agree to agree. Yeah, it makes my jaws tighten too, Jerome, the mention of Jesse Helms' name. But Brother Dexter Scott King, the younger son of Martin and Coretta King, Growing Up King, an intimate memoir. He talks in his memoir about his efforts to get Dr. King's birthday, his father's birthday, declared a national holiday. And so I play on the Thursday, the first day of class, the do y'all remember the collaboration after Dr. King's birthday was declared a national holiday? the collaboration between Stacey Lattisaw, New Edition, all these people. Man, we talked about this, so you can go back and look in the archive how Prince paid for it. Dexter King was trying to become a producer, a music producer. So all his friends in the industry and all them, they in Atlanta, the King Center, they record this album. I got a copy of the album somewhere. I don't think it's probably in storage. Mella Mel and them were on it. The Fat Boys. I don't know if you remember that, Prof. Y'all remember that? Everybody sing for Martin Luther King. Julia, I'll show it to you again. Gil Scott Heron's.
We played it. We played it one episode.
You did, right? Okay, good. That's why I didn't remember. I didn't go all the way through every minute of it. Say, yeah, Gil Scott Heron, The Last Holiday. Remember, Gil Scott Heron wasn't supposed to be on that Hotter Than July tour. Stevie Wonder, 1980, Hotter Than July, put Happy Birthday to Ya. Never understood how a man who died for good. And he goes, we need a day, right? Now, we had already started Take a Day, which is where I'm going to end up today. But Bob Marley was supposed to go, but Bob Marley was sick. Eventually, cancer took him all too soon from us physically. Cancer is a beast. That's what got Mama Mashariki, Mama Nini. It's no good. But yeah, Gil Scott Heron, Marley recommended Gil Scott Heron go with him. And so Gil Scott Heron in the Last Holiday, that's why he calls this The Last Holiday, the memoir. And he talks about growing up. It's really a story of Gil Scott Heron's life, but at the center of it is traveling around the country with Stevie Wonder, pushing to get this thing and made into a national holiday. And so I just want to kind of spend the last part of today, because when we were down at the Martin Luther King Library yesterday, and I was sitting there having this conversation, and with Brother Derek Gray. Derek Gray is the archivist in the People's Archive, which is the history of DC, the archives of DC, and so much of what happened around the African world gets brought to DC because this is, the political center of the criminal enterprise called the United States of America, and one of the centers of the criminal enterprise of the last 500 years of European settler colonialism. New York being kind of like the nerve center economically in many ways, but Washington DC being the place where they come and spray Lysol over their criminal deeds. But at any rate, so the DC archives have a lot of very interesting history, and there's on the 4th floor, if you ever go to the Martin Luther King Library, it's a brilliantly curated library and collection. There are these constant permanent exhibits on DC history, and one of them is devoted to go-go, one's devoted to Black folk in DC, the relationship of Howard and other universities to the Black Power movement. There's a beautiful little biopic film on Nannie Helen Burroughs and Martin Luther King in DC, and of course there's one for the great Marion S. Barry. They got Marion Barry on a horse in front of the White House. I was telling Derek, I said, bro, y'all curated this so beautifully. And so we were talking about that. And of course, at the center of this, Washington, D.C. is one of the early cities to declare Dr. King's birthday a holiday because Marion Barry was the mayor. But it wasn't the earliest, which is where I want to go with this. So it's obligatory on the day, as we talk about Martin Luther King's birthday, to do a quick chronology. Let me put a 5-minute chronology of King, and I promise you it's not even going to be fully 5 minutes. I got my hourglass here because this is particularly for young people who might not know. Of course, he's born in January 1929, the 15th, as we know. And as you say, Prof, this year, the actual holiday and the birthday line up right there at 501 Auburn Avenue, that corridor now, which is curated by the National Park Service, the Martin Luther King Center right down the street. Across the street, the pulpit that Senator Warnock preaches from, Ebenezer Baptist Church, but on the same side of the street is his house, birth home, and the King Center, of course, is the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is now run by the National Park Service, as we talked about this summer when I was down there. Of course, the same week that his sister, Willie Christine, made transition. Went to Morehouse 1944 at 15 years old because Buck Benny, Benjamin Mays, lowered the admission age to try to keep some of those young boys out of World War II. Dr. King was writing as early as 1946. The 6th of August, the Atlanta Constitution publishes a letter that he wrote that says that Black people, quote, are entitled to basic rights and opportunities of American citizens. And shout out to Claiborne Carson and his folks at the Martin Luther King Institute project at Stanford University. Clay Carson has done some excellent work on Martin King. You can go and get a number of the primary documents. You can see these chronologies. There are a number of volumes of the Martin Luther King papers that have been published, and I didn't pull any of those because you can go back in the archive and look at that. We talked about all these. He became an assistant pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in February 1948. So he wasn't even 20 years old. He got his bachelor's degree at Morehouse that same summer. His sister graduated from Spelman. Christine had been there before. And then he went up to Crozier's Theological Seminary. And there's an excellent book on his, and I did pull this. I don't think I showed this one before. I think this may have come out since it's called The Seminarian. The Seminarian. Martin Luther King Comes of Age. Look at young Mike King. Martin Luther King there. This is 1950. So Dr. King is, no, it's actually not. It's 1948. So he's like 19, 20 years old. Got his car, driving between there and Philly, hanging out in Philly. My man's. And there's a whole nother story there. We don't get into that again. I said 5 minutes and about halfway through. And I'm just doing the early days because, the thing that we have to understand, we pause here because the rest of it's going to confirm this. Martin Luther King was not produced in an integrated society. If you remember this summer, I was reading Jonathan Igg's new book on King, A Life, Jonathan Igg, which is interesting because he talks about King as a little boy being dressed up like he's a field hand, an enslaved person, singing at the debut of Gone with the Wind in 1939 in Atlanta. Forced to do it because, his father, Martin Luther King Sr., and them, those conservative black pastors, was like, this is a way of talking about racial cooperation, whatever. And by the way, it also sent me because, on King's birthday weekend, I try to do some things that kind of remind me of the importance. And I'm thinking maybe I've been carrying this around and reading a few pages of it at a time. This is David Levering Lewis's volume on King. He wrote this in the year after King was assassinated. It was published in 1969. King, a biography. It's called a critical biography when it was published. I recommend it, David Levering Lewis, because it's written in kind of real time. He interviewed a lot of people who were ancestors now. Like I couldn't interview Edie Nixon, people like that, Rosa Parks, of course. And so he met Coretta, who was up there in Boston after King went to get his PhD at Boston University to study systematic theology. They got married in 1953 in June 18th. For those of you who are for June 18th is an important day. That's also their wedding anniversary. And then they moved to Montgomery, 1954. We were in Montgomery. I'm going back to Montgomery. Y'all stay tuned. We got some big things planned for this summer, spring and summer. So Dexter Avenue, they started in 1954, of course, after Vernon John. So I was just rereading some Vernon Johns the other day. Was put out. Yolanda was born there in November. Miss Parks arrested December 1955, and the rest takes off. Dr. King, his books, his first book, Stride Toward Freedom. Shout out to the great Lawrence Reddick, Paul Lawrence Dunbar Reddick. Reddick, right? His biographer, his first biographer. We've talked about Fred Gray, Browder versus Gale. The first time, finally, as the sand runs out, Dr. King spoke at the Lincoln Memorial was in 1957, May 17th, where he gave a speech called Give Us the Ballot at the Prayer Pilgrimage for Freedom. The D.C. Public Library, Brother Gray and them had put together a video, and you see King on the steps there with Mordecai Johnson, President Howard, others there. And, his second book, Stride Towards Freedom, 1958. After that, 1959, they go, and that's where they meet Nehru. He didn't meet Gandhi. People talk about Dr. King and Gandhi. No, that was Mordecai Johnson and our man Howard Thurman and them who went over there to talk to Gandhi. Don't mistake the momentum of memory, because it'll have you putting your ancestors in touch with other ancestors before you put them in touch with your own ancestors. So it's very important. Of course, 1960, SNCC is organized. The SCLC gets in with them. Ella Jo Baker is very important. Dr. King is arrested in Atlanta to sit in. I've gone over the time, so I'm going to stop now in 1963 because I want to talk about 1963 and go over the context and then talk a little bit more about the holiday, and we'll be finished. 1963, I thought, I Have a Dream is where they freeze King. We're going to see that played on the Endless Loop on Monday. And they got us painting walls and doing stuff that we already paid for as if this day is supposed to be a day of service. No, where my money? I want to know. And so I pulled from the archive, if I can find it here. Yes. I pulled this volume, The Student Voice. I bought this at the Strand bookstore years ago. This is a collection called The Student Voice, 1960 to 1965. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Claiborne Carson, again, Clay Carson on the case, compiled by the staff of the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers Project out there at Stanford. This is the student newspaper, the newspaper of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And this is the volume that came out in October 1963. It's not in August 1963, although interestingly, August 1963, which came out before the march, the lead story is Cambridge, Maryland, with Gloria Richardson and them. Desegregation pact signed after 18-month CNAC protest. Very interested on the Eastern Shore. And this is when John Lewis was elected the chairman of SNCC. But in their newsletter of October 1963, volume 4, number 3, 210,000 marchers here. SNCC head call for new protests. This ain't I Have a Dream. This is John Lewis, the new chair of SNCC, and they print the text of the speech, and they remind people in the SNCC newsletter, 1963, that the SNCC head called for continued demonstrations across the nation. Lewis pointed out weaknesses in the Kennedy bill. This is going to become the Civil Rights Act of 1964 after Kennedy's assassinated in 1963, November. Lewis pointed out weaknesses in the Kennedy bill and called for stronger measures to ensure freedom. He had been forced to delete portions of his original speech when the Most Reverend Patrick O'Boyle, Archbishop of Washington, said he would not appear on the platform if changes were not made. So remember, there was a different speech SNCC wanted to give. I think about that now in the context of the Catholic Church. You've seen Pope Francis kind of sanction same-sex marriage and things like that. There was a front page article in the New York Times earlier this week where that has caused a lot of ripple effects in some of the fastest growing areas for the Catholic Church in the world. And this article focused on Africa, where people are saying, so you see, again, in terms of ways of knowing and governance, there's a lot of stuff. If we're going to agree within our own context, forget these other contexts, there are some serious things we're going to have to confront. And it's interesting to see in the Catholic Church where this is being pushed. But in 1963, that is that's a conversation that's light years away. This cat O'Boyle don't even want SNCC to talk tough about repercussions and consequences if you don't get this legislation passed. Of course, John Lewis eventually becomes a congressperson, and all the way to his transition becomes a figure that is widely misunderstood, in part because people take out the John Lewises they want and they leave the John Lewis who meets Malcolm X in East Africa. They leave the John Lewis who makes this speech. In fact, we hear, I have a dream. That ain't even the whole King speech. How many times do we hear this? That the King, John Lewis says, we march today for jobs and freedom, but we have nothing to be proud of. For hundreds and thousands of our brothers are not here. They have no money for their transportation, for they are receiving starvation wages or no wages at all. While we stand here, there are sharecroppers in the Delta of Mississippi who are out in the fields working for less than $3 a day for 12 hours of work. While we stand here, there are students in jail on trumped up charges. Our brother, James Farmer, along with many others, are also in jail. We come here today with a great sense of misgiving. And he goes on, and of course, I'm not going to read the whole speech, although they print the whole speech here, with the demands. They had demands at the March on Washington, many of which are then echoed by Martin King in his Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community that we read. A standard living wage for everybody. And King talks about universal basic income, education, healthcare. Now, people would say John Lewis is just a stooge of the Democratic Party. Okay, your lips probably need to close. Ears open, eyes open, and understand that the John Lewis that reaches the end of his physical life is a different John Lewis than John Lewis who was at the steps of the March on Washington. At the same time, he's the same John Lewis. Part of recovering our ancestors is understanding the forces that buffet them. And we ask our question, is it better to have John Lewis in Congress than not? Is it better to have Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar and AOC and them in the Congress than not? I don't know. Ask Marjorie Taylor effing Greene. Is it better to have Rashida Tlaib in Congress than not? Yeah. That is a legitimate discussion to have if we can't reach critical mass. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about self-determination and what tools can we use and strategies can we use. But if we're going in with an agreement to agree, because our common objective is the same, then perhaps we can make some headway in these conversations. And as we think about dreaming in 2024 and going forward into a critical period where we are faced with some very serious times. And as John Lewis is saying here in August 1963, I'm here, but these people can't go nowhere. we're here because this is the seat of the crime, and this is where you do the criminal enterprise work, and we're going to have to face that at some point. We have to now be mature. This ain't about winning debate points and talking to echo chambers for clicks and likes, unless it is. And if that's what it is, then well, let's just say that's what it is. In fact, if you listen very carefully, you can hear that coming out a lot of times. But we have to understand that these ritual moments aren't for us to just celebrate. These are ritual moments for us to reflect and regain the momentum of memory and to reclaim the ancestors we have left. So we'll end with this. Clay Carson wrote an interesting little piece on Martin Luther King's birthday. A nice essay in a 2-volume work. And I collect these books because they're useful, like children's literature. You get these little thumbnail things. This is a 2-volume work called Encyclopedia of American Holidays and National Days. I like those kind of things because it kind of, but the first essay in volume 1 of the work is called Martin Luther King Jr.'s Birthday. What Clay Carson says is the establishment of a national holiday honoring Martin Luther King grew out of the numerous localized efforts to honor King in the aftermath of his assassination. During the months following King's death on April 4th, 1968, many communities reacted by naming streets, schools, and other public landmarks after the same leader. And we talked about that in Knubia. Let me pull up the chat here because people are probably talking about this in here. All the things we talked about, people not going to work, people not doing that work. Yeah, when Karen came in, we were talking about the things that you're not going to work on Martin Luther King's birthday. When? 1969. Starting even then. Y'all remember when I was in Atlanta last summer and I was at the King Center, when we were talking about the end of so-called affirmative action at Harvard and in UNC and the beginning of the attack on it everywhere else, whatever's left of it. You remember I had the King Center shirt on because I'd been at the King Center the previous day, the 1968 shirt, which is when it started. In fact, on June 26, 1968, Clay Carson writes that Coretta Scott King founded the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Center. Of course, our man and now ancestor Vincent Harding talks about that. And that on January 15, 1969, the King Center held an ecumenical service and other events to observe the date of Dr. King's birth 40 years earlier. During the 1970s, things began to expand. 1971, Atlanta designated King's birthday a paid holiday for city employees. 1973, the first King holiday bill, sponsored by then Assemblyman Harold Washington. How's Harold? Some of y'all know, if you know the history of Chicago. Another great ancestor, our man Conrad Worrell, who was part of that movement, talks about that. Hey, where Harold Washington going in the world? How's Harold? If you tell somebody you from Chicago, how's Harold? He was an assemblyman in Illinois state legislature. He introduced the bill in 1973, which was signed into law in Illinois, and in 1974, Massachusetts and Connecticut declared a holiday. John Conyers, Detroit, blackest city in America. Don't get mad, Chicago. I know, y'all all claim that. Very interesting. I ain't mad at y'all. John Conyers introduced legislation to create a federal holiday for Martin Luther King 4 days after Dr. King was killed, and he continued to push it. The Congressional Black Caucus was started in 1969. I don't know what this Shirley Chisholm film is going to be with Regina King. I'm sure it's not going to be anchored in any of this because, again, the GOAT conversation, the representative figure conversation, is driven by the context of the generation that creates it. So all these films, the Rustin film, which I watched, they're not ensemble pieces like what we saw with Boycott that we all watched together in Knubia. They're these hagiographic attempts to put these figures not in the context of their times or the collective governance formations, but in the context of titillating media creations of the now. That's why even looking at the commercials for The Color Purple, I'm seeing so much moving around and dancing in colors and stuff. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about AJ and that love is the message of death. What a beautiful thing. Oh, I feel sick. Oh, I'm dead. Why? Yeah, but you looked good dying. All right, so going on. As the Congressional Black Caucus ranks expanded from the 13 members who founded it in 1969, the idea of establishing a National King holiday gained substantial backing. So over the arc of it, they're fighting back saying, release his FBI records. We're going to stop it. These are the racists, right? But then when Jimmy Carter is elected president, they have a quantum leap in support. The King Center moved to where it is now on Auburn Avenue in 1979. Jimmy Carter is the president. They moved Dr. King's body over there to the crypt. Remember, in her memoir, Christine King, Willie Christine, talks about how they kept shooting up the cemetery where Dr. King was buried with his parents and them. And so they, in the middle of the night, exhumed him to get him over to the king. This country, I'm not going to restrain myself. I'm sorry, Baba Jetty. I know Baba Marie will say I agree to agree, but I got more to fire. Marie Kelsey, I can hear him saying this too. So I'm just going to say it. This is a criminal damn enterprise, and it must be dismantled. It has to be dismantled. I'm not talking about dismantling humanity or society. I'm talking about remaking where we live, wherever we are in the world, in a more human fashion, in a way that shows. And these people here, you shooting up a cemetery where Dr. King is. I am your open and loving it enemy. In 1979, they moved the King Center to Auburn Avenue. National Councils of Churches the previous year, 1978, November, had urged Congress to pass a King holiday bill. And the bill got defeated in November 1979 in a floor vote, the House of Representatives, by only 5 votes. In fact, the King Center's National King Holiday Petition campaign garnered more than 300,000 signatures before the end of that year to do it, and they still defeated it. 300,000 signatures, falling far short of where Karen Hunter spearheaded to get that flag down. I saw Bree Newsom Bass making comment on Democracy Now! On the Biden speech and what happened there at Emmanuel as well. 1981, January 15th, more than 100,000 people rallied at the National Monument. That's where Stevie Wonder performed. If you go on, you can see that performance. You can see his testimony before Congress. The momentum is building. But of course, they've gotten rid of Jimmy Carter, and now you have the gladiator invader of Grenada, the Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666, as the president of the 6 letters in each of his names. But at any rate, the president of the United States. And so in 1981, Coretta Scott King writes the governors, mayors, and chairpersons of city councils across the United States, urging them to pass resolutions and proclamations as well to organize celebrations commemorating Martin Luther King's birthday. And then in 1982, the King Center keeps working with Stevie Wonder to observe the 20th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington that we just talked about. And they gather that year with financial support from Stevie Wonder. They open a lobbying office in D.C., and they presented petitions bearing more than 6 million signatures in support of the King holiday to Massachusetts Democrat Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. At the anniversary of the march approach during the summer of 1983, support for the legislation increased. On August the 2nd, the House passed a bill creating the King holiday by an overwhelming vote of 338 to 90. The bill received bipartisan support, and RRR indicated that, RWR 666 indicated that he would not veto the legislation if it came before him. Y'all mad at that? Please be so angry that you explode in anger. Yeah, open enemy, trust. But the Senate debate concerning the bill was nonetheless contentious. Opponents such as North Carolina Senators Jesse Helms and John P. East strongly opposed the legislation. That's when they want to open up unseal the FBI surveillance tapes. They try to destroy this man, destroy him. Y'all don't want no holiday. And then watch this. Republican Senator Bob Dole famously retorted, quote, this is what Bob Dole said. I suggest they hurry back to their pocket calculators. I'm sorry. Let me just read the sentence before that. Supporters of the legislation countered by denouncing the use of FBI documents that were based on illegal surveillance of King, and to critics who disingenuously balked at the financial costs involved with creating a new national holiday and the resulting loss of productivity, because they're saying, well, you create a new holiday, we got to pay the federal workers. Well, Republican Senator Bob Dole famously retorted, quote, I suggest they hurry back to their pocket calculators and estimate the cost of 300 years of slavery, followed by a century or more of economic, political, and social exclusion and discrimination, end quote. Not Bob Dole giving a reparations gesture as an excuse. Oh, you worried about how much money we got to pay federal workers for one day? As Minister Farrakhan gave in that famous speech he gave in Atlanta, figure it up. Let's count the cost. And when you count the cost of everything you did to us, you owe us the whole damn country, and we don't even want that. Now, some people do want the country, but good luck with your little criminal enterprise. All you Negroes out there with them flag avatars on Twitter coming at me. Come at me. I don't even feel that. I'm pouring clean glasses of water. I'm not getting in the mud with y'all. In August 27, 1983, the King Center convened the 20th anniversary march on Washington, supported by more than 750 organizations. More than 500,000 people attended the march, more than twice the number who came in 63, and rallied at the Lincoln Memorial. And all the speakers called upon the Senate and Reagan to enact the King holiday. They came back in October to consider. The Senate considered the House bill. They passed the bill. The Senate finally voted on the bill October 19th. It was 78-22. Then he signed, President of the United States, that is, on November the 2nd, 1983, with Coretta King in attendance. He signed H.R. 3706, Public Law 98-144, establishing the third Monday of every January as the Martin Luther King Jr. national holiday, beginning in 1986. And then the fight over the celebration began. The first official celebration, January 20th, 1986, at the King Center. Desmond Tutu, Vice President George H.W. Bush. How about that? Kennedy was there, Senator Kennedy, of course, Ted Kennedy. So many others came. And then all these other cities, you see them going over and doing the celebrations. And as they did them, at first only 17 states officially recognized the occasion, but during the 80s and 90s, the people pushed, and eventually 44 got it, the last two being New Hampshire and Arizona. Remember Chuck D and them, our man Carr Rittenhauer, brother Chuck D, by the time I get to Arizona, that Public Enemy song, because they were the next to last, although the last was New Hampshire. New Hampshire's still mad because they put South Carolina in front of them in the Democratic caucus primary. You're the whitest state in some ways. Yeah, y'all didn't want to create Martin Luther King's birthday as a state holiday. In the spring of 84, the King Center developed a legislative proposal to establish the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Holiday Commission, which they did establish, which was passed by Congress and signed by the president August 27, 1984. At the first meeting of the commission in November of 1984, Mrs. King was unanimously elected chairperson, sworn in by Federal District Judge Horace Ward on the day of the first national observance. And by 1989, they had gotten up to 44 states. And the labor unions came in, and the last resistance ended when New Hampshire, on June 7th, 1999, ended its distinction when Governor Jean Shaheen signed her state's King holiday legislation into law, finally completing the enactment of the holiday in all the states. Now, the question is, what do we do with all that effort? Because most of those people are ancestors now. And people say, oh, King holiday don't mean, hey, your mouth is open. We see your brain and we see where there needs to be some supplementing of what you know. It wasn't to have a holiday. It was to create a space. And it was Clinton, by the way, who then passed resolution saying it should be a day of service. Well, Bill, who I saw give some tribute to Eddie Bernice Johnson, I want to say this to you, Bill. I don't give a damn what you think it should be. I'm not painting no school walls. I'm not picking up no trash without first asking, where is the budget for sanitation and how much is the daily wage for these people who are dumping the trash, and why did you privatize? I want those questions first, because that's what Dr. King was saying and why we can't wait and where do we go from here. And now, after that, we can certainly gather. We want to feed people and do that, but y'all not going to trick us into turning this into something it's not, because we will not leave our ancestors. So something to think about on Martin Luther King weekend as we go into 2024. And we're now in session 201, having committed to use this year to enact these solutions to deepen our study and to regain the momentum of memory.
You are truly a legend. To that young lady that got to take your class, and all of the hundreds that you teach, hundreds of people every semester, is, oh my goodness, it's stunning. But that you are impacting so many lives in this governance structure space, but you bring us there with you, and then you share it here in Nubia and beyond Nubia. I just want to say thank you. I feel the same way as that young lady.
And for this to be Mashariki, not just generally, these are people. Like, I couldn't.
Yes. We were talking about that before we came on. Like, when you are operating your purpose, everything falls in alignment.
Everything. Oh, I couldn't. I still can't. I'm telling you, I couldn't. I couldn't. This is, I ain't tell nobody else. So everybody here, this is the first time I'm telling everybody. So Naila, I hope I didn't embarrass you or your grandfather, who, I'll see later on at the ritual. But how does that, like you said, we were talking before we came on. These are not coincidences. Well, I guess they can be coincidences, because technically a coincidence doesn't say what attributes the fact that this incident and this incident happened at the same time. It's just coincidence. But people, I think, overburden that word to to strip it of the possibility that there's a larger meaning, and there's absolutely larger meaning. But you said it, Prof. Walking in our purpose, our Nia, which you have been stressing with us all along. We're coming into alignment. We're getting there, aren't we?
We're here.
We're here. We're
You and I.
here.
Yeah, we're here. So many thousands are here, walking in alignment in their purpose, in their wholeness, bringing their brick, drinking this clean glass of water, and then bringing it out. And I will also, I have to keep reiterating this: you can't drag people into it.
No,
They have to be driven,
no.
by their spirit to come, to seek. It is an action that is taken upon you to seek, ask, knock. All of those things are something you have to do. You can't force that on anybody.
No.
So you can't be mad if your kids aren't listening, if your children aren't participating, if your husband, your spouse, your significant other doesn't want to be down. It's all good. It's all good. Everyone
All good.
narrows the road that leads to salvation. Few will travel it. Of course, we want everyone. We want everyone,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it has to be up to them to be here. I also want to wish you safe travels. Surprisingly, you were going to be with us in South Carolina, and then again,
I didn't mention that.
We didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell anybody you were going to show up.
Yeah. Mashriki was like, "Nah, you got to come."
Yeah,
over
you got to come there, and that's all part of that's all part of something that we can't see. You know what I'm saying? You don't know,
and it's not time yet, because I tell you, South Carolina is very dear to me, and I don't think it's any coincidence either, or that it's a greater meaning to the fact that they were all down there at Mother Emanuel in the week that y'all are going to be there. I mean, I think that gives it an added urgency, I think, because Clementa Pinckney was a good brother. You know what I'm saying? And all of those Africans that lost their lives. I think there's another meaning with Baba Omo. And, I started gathering all my Kiowa stuff. I had my Lorenzo Dow Turner Gullah stuff, just because I wanted to sit in that space with these Gullah Geechee Negroes. In fact, Arthur J. for the time was with Julie Dash, they were partners who made Daughters of the Dust, which is set right there where y'all want to be. So, I mean, even what we talking about is all part of that, and I never leave that. I never leave this far. Daughters of the Dust. This is the script. This is the script, because Tony K. Bombara and Bell Hooks did commentary on it. So there they are. This is where y'all going to be. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I just, and of course you see the script, and you see the edits and everything that's in there. These are the pages of the script. And if you've never seen Daughters of the Dust, that may be one we need to watch.
Yeah. I'm gonna figure out how we can get the Love is the Message is Death.
Oh yeah.
Because we gotta do a Knubia and refill. And as you're talking, I'm looking forward to being with the great Tina McElroy Ansa, who has spent her life in the Geechee Gullah on St. John's Island.
St. John's.
So we're we're in that water. We're gonna be in that water. And somewhere in Nikki Haley, even though she'll be probably somewhere else, it's like it's all of that. And I made a last minute audible to include the International African American Museum for those who are coming to Healthy, Wealthy, Wise, which is a retreat I do through my radio show on Sirius XM, the Karen Hunter Show. We added that, and I just thought it was important. So that wasn't originally something that we were going to do. But when I came down on a site visit, I was like, we cannot be here and not check out this new museum, and then visit the angel oak tree, the 400 or 500 year old tree that is its own being. I mean, it's so wild. So I added two extra things in addition to the basket weaving from a Geechee Gullah expert, to the yoga, to the sound meditation, to the double Dutch, and the cards that we're playing in the karaoke, because as adults we need to have fun, enjoy, and act like kids. And I can't wait for that, and the trash talk. But you'll be at the next one. And
I should mention Kat was down there. She loves going over there. She was at the museum. There's a young brother who hasn't even finished undergrad yet, Darius Brown. Okay. He gave a presentation at the museum of his new book, At the Feet of the Elders, A Journey into a Low Country Family History. This is a young man who hadn't even finished undergraduate yet, who has done a book. I hope it's on sale. Kat, you can let us know if she's here right now, or reach out to you and let you know, because of course, I haven't been to that museum yet. And again, whatever his politics, whatever his reasons, we can debate and should debate and discuss. one of the moving forces behind that museum was Congressman Clyburn, who, of course, started his professional career as a history teacher. So it's not that he doesn't know. So it's important to understand people can be many things. And so that is going to be a magical moment when y'all go there. This young brother apparently also helped. There's a new book that isn't out yet. It comes out in February on Harriet Tubman and the Combahee River Rebellion. Because remember, that's where they're in South Carolina. She got them Africans together and they set fire to plantations and rescued 750,000 Africans in one swoop. So it wasn't just Eastern Shore to Pennsylvania, but there's a new book coming out on it. And this young brother, Darius Brown, helped. So if you down there in Cactus, find Darius.
The power of this museum is the genealogy, you know. So I'm giving people just a little taste of it, those who are coming, because we're only gonna be there 3 days.
Yes.
But you must come back and sit with your ancestors and find your people, because so many of us come through that port.
Yes.
Including my people from Somerville and Augusta.
Call them. Hold up. Let me go ahead. You calling them now. You calling them.
Yeah. My granddaddy that's over my shoulder, he built a house in Somerville, which he died in. And my dad's people from Columbia, and that's why he went to Allen. So, you know, that South Carolina space for most Africans who came through this country, that was the port of entry. So
that's right. And for everybody, I heard Governor Patterson say this about the New York African Burial Ground. And I respect the sentiment and the feeling, and I absolutely reject the metaphor when he said that the New York African Burial Ground was our Ellis Island. No.
Yeah,
get rid of that. In fact, go read CLR James's book, Renegades, Mariners, Renegades, and Castaways, about how they deported people out of Ellis Island. And we didn't ask come here anyway, but that South Carolina moment, which among many other people, Michael Gomez writes about so eloquently in Exchanging Our Country Marks, that in many ways is the beginning of African America. Between that one, New York, Mobile, those port cities where Africans who didn't know each other had to create something new. That is the genius of our people. You're gonna be sitting there with the genius of our people. The Lessons of the Hour. That's the film that Isaac Julian made on Frederick Douglass, because I'm submitting that because that's what Julian. These are the lessons. So I really wish, and people in the chat are saying they got fear of missing out because they ain't rolling with you everywhere.
Oh, no, we doing it again. We have to. I mean, there's 500 people on the waiting list. We have to. So while I'm there, Tina McElroy answers like, we're gonna find another place, because you know, when you don't know, sometimes it's like being at Hershey. Man, when you came to Hershey and excoriated,
no,
I was like,
but everywhere here is like that.
Yeah.
When I remember the first time I went to Penn Center, it was with Mashariki and them. Mashariki, Mulimu Shuja, who is now an ancestor, recently made transition to great educator. Hannibal Afrique, the great educator. It was a meeting of the Council of Independent Black Institutions. We were at Penn Center. And we, of course, driving down from Philly. Now it's getting dark. And of course, you know better than I do from being from down them parts. You know, my mom in Alabama saying, wait, when it get dark, it get dark. You know what I'm saying? So we pull up into this gas station, make sure we're in the right place. Brother, we going to the Penn Center. Oh, yeah, you're right there. Go to the corner, man. You that live over there. Then you come over there and you just there. You pull up in the box, and then people they take care of you when you get down there. Yeah, we in the right place right now. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, I wish I could be there physically with you all, but the spirit of everyone being there collectively, that's gonna shower over all of that. So traveling mercies, go with God and be in that space, because our ancestors, too much blood was spilled, too many songs were sung, too much resistance was made, and too much triumph was made for us not to be in that space, to say you couldn't kill us, and that ain't even the point. We be here. So please be with us in that water.
And as you usher our sister, your spiritual mom, into becoming one of the most powerful ancestors we could probably have, I want to send you all the love and light, and strength as you travel to do that work, because it's work, it's labor of love, it's all of that. And we appreciate you immensely, Dr. Carr. Thank you.
Love
You too. Let's finish with this image today, because she was trending, you know, Coretta Scott King, since we're in the King weekend, she was trending. So her daughter posted this on Twitter. She said, my mother wasn't a prop. She was a peace, PEACE advocate before she met my father, and was instrumental in him speaking out against the Vietnam War. Please understand, my mama was a force. And then she put a link for a piece that she wrote on her mother years ago. So I just wanted to, as people want people to be Coretta Scott King, which is nice. It's a nice, she's
It's a great,
definitely,
it's a great admiration. Now, of course,
yes.
with these kind of ancestors, and this is something that we were talking about when you were getting ready to, you planning to go. When you say something like that, there are consequences that you didn't think about. You might actually get your wish, brother. So be careful what you wish for. You may be careful what you wish, because it ain't a bad thing to want that. But if you get it, you don't know what to do with it. So anyway, shout out to Bernice. This is what I'm talking about. That's a queen mother sitting right there. You might get your wish, brother.
That's right.
You can only dream that would be the case. Because you have to be Martin Luther King to get here. So be ready.
Amen. Safe travels to you. Safe travels to everyone on those highways and byways. I'll see some of y'all in the next couple of days in South Kakalaki. Happy Martin Luther King holiday. Do what you will. Honor yourself and our community while you do it. And we're not taking any lead from Bill Clinton on anything.
Nah, we don't know nothing about that.
Nothing.
Nope.
Love you, Dr. Carr.
Love you too, Professor.
All right. Bye, y'all.